So allegedly, Kurt Cobain hated the commercial releases and mixes and masters of Nevermind, which was released by Andy Wallace all the way back in 1991, and completely disavowed them, saying the Butch Vig initial mixes were much better. However, other reports show that he enjoyed and loved, was absolutely blown away by the initial Andy Wallace mixes, and simply discarded them to keep his punk cred. What I'm going to look into here is which of these mixes are actually better. I've got two tracks, Smells Like Teen Spirit and Come As You Are, and we're going to break down the differences between the Andy Wallace mixes and the Butch Vig mixes in this video to find out which one is better. Obviously, there's a huge level of subjectivity to this, and it comes down to what the artist prefers, but there's actually some pretty massive differences in these mixes. We finally got to hear the Butch Vig mixes a couple decades later on some deluxe edition and re-releases of the album, but in this video, I want to take a look at those differences here, and from a mixing engineer perspective, what are the differences here, and what would probably be better for the record as a whole. So let's get into the video, let's get into the DAW, and I'm going to break down the differences between these mixes on the track Smells Like Teen Spirit and Come As You Are. Okay, so I've got the session loaded up. I have the Andy Wallace mixes at the top here and the Butch Vig mixes on the record. They're referenced as the Devonshire mixes. These are the Butch Vig mixes that were initially done. So I have two tracks, Smells Like Teen Spirit, Come As You Are, pretty representative of the album sound as a whole, I think. So I think these are good ones to pick. Let's just kind of start off with Smells Like Teen Spirit. Let's hear the Andy Wallace version here. They look to be similar loudness as well. So let's just hear the intro. Let's go to a chorus section here. Let's hear Kurt's vocals. Okay, that's the Andy Wallace version. Let me hear the Butch Vig version here. Okay, let's go to a chorus. Okay, very interesting. I want to focus in on this intro first, though. Just the difference between the intro guitar licks. Almost seems like the Butch Vig one is wider in a sense, maybe a little wetter. Could be some chorus, some stereo widening going on. Yeah, the Andy Wallace one is very mono. I think maybe that was on purpose to get the intro sound very mono, and then you kind of have that spread out wide guitars that come in, the drums, thundering drums. It sounds really wide when it comes in. For the Butch one, I mean, it still sounds really good, but Andy Wallace's seems to have a little more dynamic range, or not necessarily dynamic range, but there's a little more overall dynamics to his mix. That intro feels a little smaller. There's also a big difference in the drum sounds. So I think this kind of snare intro can kind of highlight the difference in the drum sounds. The Butch Vig mix. Now remember, this is a 1991 record, so we're just coming off hair metal. We're just coming off these very, overblown drum sounds, right? Drum samples, Litten drums, right? Very reverby drums. And we're starting to transition to the era of drier sounding records and things like that, and grunge kind of having this more dry punk sound coming in. So we're at that transition point. I think Butch Vig's mixes are much more reminiscent of an 80s drum sound. Like the snare almost sounds gated. Like this sounds like a gated reverb maybe. Or maybe a heavily compressed room or overhead. Definitely more explosive snare. Andy Wallace's snare sounds a little more raw, like it's off the kit. And I know that's a funny thing to say because I think it's pretty much well known that there are some sample triggers on the drums on Nirvana's Nevermind, right? Pretty much everyone knows that at this point. There is, some trigger and some room, but it feels really raw. I feel like I'm hearing the kit. Butch's, the drums, the snare especially sounds like it's a little more fake sounding, which is really ironic because Butch's, I think, probably is the real snare and Andy's is probably the fake triggered snare, but it's just what it sounds like to me. There's a lot of dry punch in that kick. Overall, Butch's sounds like a little more scooped. Like Butch's kind of has a little more of this going on, which is fine. It's not bad. It's not overdone at all. I actually think the Butch mix is quite a fun listen. But Andy's sounds pushed like here. Like you can definitely hear the presence of those guitars. Like if I wanted the Andy one to sound like Butch's, sounds more like that. And if I wanted to change Butch's to Andy's, I would do the opposite of that. I'd give it more of that mid-range. But let me take those plugins off, of course. But really, they sound like this. Anyways, it just feels like Andy's is more pushed in the mid-range. Butch's a little more scooped, a little more explosive drum sound. Let's get to a verse part here. Of course, Andy Wallace is well known for his chorus bass guitar. You can hear that here. We can hear the vocals as well. Yeah, you can hear the snare there. Sounds gated, could be a sample, right? Really just psh, psh, right? It kind of has that sound. Let's hear the vocal in Andy's. Vocal feels a little more present. So in a weird way, Butch's sounds almost like the drums are more produced in his, but it feels raw. It feels like the band is playing in a room a little more. Andy's feels a little more polished. Nothing wrong with either. I kind of maybe personally prefer the Andy one, maybe because I'm just so used to it at this point. But Andy's sounds a little more polished. Everything's a little more forward. There's more mid-range. There's more balance. Butch's just sounds like band in a room sort of thing with the drums kind of over-enhanced. That's kind of the vibe I get from this. Very present vocal. There's some like verb and delay on it. Drums are definitely just more scooped on the Butch version. That snare, I just like the Andy snare a lot more. It feels more real. It's got some sort of, a really nice attack to it. Who doesn't want to hear more Dave Grohl too? The drum performance or how it's mixed on Andy's mix is much more dynamic. You can feel the drums building a little better. The Butch mix, it was like, really gated crazy in the intro, and then it kind of versed, the snare kind of had the same feel. Felt more dynamic in the Andy mix, just in my opinion. Like that snare fill, like that feels like sample one shots almost. For me, for a band like Nirvana on this album, for me that's kind of a knock against the Butch mix. I like the rawness of it, but to me it's like that snare fill needs to feel and sound real. See how that one builds? Listen to the Butch one. It doesn't feel like it builds. Overall, more upper mids and Andy's for sure. Let's skip over to the solo part, since that's basically the song. Yeah, this one feels like you're at a garage show of Nirvana with some drum samples on, and the Andy's feels like a commercial, more sounding rock mix, and there's nothing wrong with that. I could see why people could criticize that. I love the Andy. The Andy one sounds so professional and so good, but the Butch one has a vibe, I have to admit. You feel front row almost, and then Andy's still sounds raw enough, and I think you got to give Andy Wallace a ton of credit. This sounds commercial, forward, polished, but also sounds dirty. It also sounds raw. And I think that's a fine line when you're a mix engineer, but he definitely pulled off this record. And I think the just oodles and oodles of sales of Nevermind kind of is a testament to his abilities. feel like the guitar solo feedback is longer in the Butch one. Yeah, it kind of cuts out on the Andy one. I think if you watch a video of Butch breaking down these songs, which he does, here you can be able to watch that video, as he talks about how I think the initial mix, that feedback was allowed to go on longer. I got to give Butch credit. I think that's cooler. The feedback on that solo goes through the whole third verse. I think just makes that track. Ooh, and that's just like, that's super cool. And like his vocal sounds like it almost has no processing. They're very raw. So two very different approaches to this mix, both very cool. I'm leaning Andy Wallace. Let's listen to Come As You Are though here. Super raw sounding drums. Let's see what the Butch Vig one gives us. Yeah, I think just the Butch Vig drum mix is just, it's not the Andy Wallace drum mix. I think that's what takes away from these for me. Raw drum intro though. Andy Wallace definitely put some chorus, more chorus. I assume there was chorus on there, but he put more chorus on there. I mean, that feels almost like a DI guitar sound in a way. Just love that snare sound. I think it's just a lot better than the Butch one, but I like the dynamics here on the Butch one.
Come as you are, as you were, as I want you.
Everything is just much more present in the Andy one. Similar approach to what we saw in Smells Like Teen Spirit.
Hurry up, choice is yours, don't be late. Take a rest.
More present vocal on the Andy Wallace one. Let's just go to like near the end.
When I swear,
There's way more low end and low mid information, and it's kind of a little more scooped in the top, especially like that 1 to 3K range in the Butch Vig mix, in my opinion. You can really hear the difference in this section here. Trying to get to the solo. It becomes hard to hear the rhythm guitars at times on the Butch one, I think. And Andy Wallace, I mean, he's just known for cranking the 4K, 5K on his guitars, and you can hear it here. I mean, you can barely hear those intro guitars in the outro. You can definitely tell Andy Wallace definitely rode them up here on the faders. I love how those intro guitars come back in with the chorus effect near the end. Just kind of brings the song full circle in a really satisfying way. Very, very interesting. I'm interested to hear what you guys think. Which do you like better? Do you like the Andy Wallace mixes? Do you like the Butch Vig mixes better? I don't think there's a wrong answer here, honestly. Like, you could pick either. They're both very cool. For me, the Andy Wallace wins because of the drum sound. And overall, you can hear the guitars better. There's more dynamics. It's a little more interesting. Butch Vig has more band in the room, knocking it out in the garage, except for the drum sound. Sounds a little synthetic at times. I definitely can understand why Kurt might say that one sounded raw and the Andy Wallace one sounds too polished. I can get that, but I also think he heard that he was blown away when he heard the Andy Wallace mixes as well, because Andy Wallace is an incredible engineer. So let me know in a comment, which one do you think is better? Which one do you enjoy more when listening to the album? Obviously, we're all used to the Andy Wallace mix for many, many years, but the Butch Vig one is fun. If you like videos like this, you should hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. I do videos on producing music, mixing your own music, creating your own music in your home studio, and I'm very passionate about that. So like and subscribe to the channel down below. Thank you so much for watching. Anyways, I will see you guys next time.